October is definitely a time of year where I really like to dial in on some of the classic survival horror games that I grew up with, and especially revisit some of the titles that to me I consider not just good survival horror games, but some of the best games that I think I've ever played. And one of those games in particular is Fatal Frame 2. This was a game that when it came out, I would have been about 12 or 13 years old, and my friend and I had rented it for the PlayStation 2, and I remember in his basement us playing it and me being literally too scared to continue playing. And keep in mind, at that time, I'd played the Resident Evils and even played the first Silent Hill, but Fatal Frame 2 delivered horror in a way that I hadn't experienced in a game before. And it's one of those games that even to this day, I find myself still finding a lot of this game very disturbing and a lot of the elements of it just generally horrifying. And it's one of those special titles that I haven't really played anything like it in even the modern age. So it's one title that I continuously revisit at this point. And in this video, I'm going to go over what makes this title so special and why it's worth checking out this October if you want a good scary game to play during the Halloween season. So let's take a look. So I owned Fatal Frame 2 shortly after my friend and I had rented it. I purchased it, I believe, like used for 20 or 30 bucks, and I played through it when I was probably in its entirety when I was around 14 or so, and it was a game that left a really strong lasting impact on me. And what I mean was the storyline, the atmosphere, the world itself, or the village that you traverse through, to me, were all very special. I hadn't really played many survival horror games that kind of dealt with these themes in the way that Fatal Frame 2 did. And unfortunately, when I was a young adult, I sold off the bulk of my collection, I believe, to trade it up for, more 360 stuff or Xbox One stuff. And that was one of the games that ended up going with that collection. And it was a decision that I made that I heavily regretted. And I ended up paying for it literally by having to spend around $80 to pick up a used copy of this game for the Xbox. And one of the downsides to it as well, and this is just an aside, is you can't really play it on anything else but a 360 or the original Xbox, or you can go the emulation route. I enjoy the nostalgia of having the physical game, but I understand many people may pick this up on an emulation route as well. Now, one thing I want to highlight with this game, out of the gate, the very first thing that struck me when I was a kid did come down to the sound design. And what I mean was the world itself and a lot of the voices and the whispering and the creepy noises were something that, yes, other survival horror games had done that, but Fatal Frame 2 to me at that time period, it did it in a way that truly scared me. And being able to listen to some of the ghost recordings that you get throughout the game added this extra level of weirdness and disturbingness that really fleshed out the ghosts that you were encountering, their backstories, and the horror that was going on in this world.
It's cold. Can you breathe? The water keeps coming.
And further to that, one of the things that it also really helped do was as you progress through the story and your twin sister follows behind you, and this is a bit of a plot spoiler, so if you don't want to lose or you don't want the plot ruined for you, you may not want to keep watching, but even as she starts to get possessed as well, and she changes from your loving sister to this more demonic entity, I guess you can say, and you hear her whispering weird things or menacing things, it really added a different layer to survival horror games that I hadn't experienced. Because, for example, at that time period, I did play games like Resident Evil 0 where you do have a partner trailing along with you, but oftentimes that felt more like a gimmick. Whereas this, in Fatal Frame 2, having your sister trail behind you in some parts of the game it felt like a story device as well as a gameplay mechanic, because your sister was also disabled and she couldn't move as fast as you. And that element made the game feel even more anxiety inducing, because you never really knew what was going to happen with your sister in some cases, in some parts of the game. And this also made the game overall have just an added layer of fear, which was, in my opinion, what the game set out to do, and it did a very good job of that. The other thing that I also really appreciated was, this to me was a staple of Japanese horror, which when I was younger at that time, to me, actually even now, a lot of the horror films that came out of Japan, a lot of the ghost story based ones especially, to me, were some of the best examples of horror in general. And this game took that idea and took those different concepts from a lot of these horror films and put it into this game in a very tasteful way that made sense for what was going on, like having ghosts creeping out of boxes or ghosts hiding in closets. And when you're playing the game, it almost makes the whole world feel like there's nowhere that's really safe. And very few survival horror games really tackled that, with the exception of some later titles like Silent Hill 4. You didn't really have many games where it felt like everywhere that you went was a danger zone, or could be a danger zone, because you didn't know there was going to be a ghost falling from a ceiling or something, or hiding in an area that you thought may have given you a bit of relief from being attacked by any sort of entities. And the thing that also made this scarier was Fatal Frame 2. I'm not as familiar with the other Fatal Frames. I played through a little bit of 1 and a little bit of 3, but I felt like what 2 did that also made it very special was it also elaborated on the backstories of a lot of these different ghosts that you encountered. So it added this extra level of depressing feelings towards all these different ghosts that you're encountering, which didn't just make them feel depressing, but even scarier, because you know some of the traumatic backstories that occurred with these ghosts. And to me, that formula really made Fatal Frame 2 feel very good and very different even now to a lot of other survival horror games. And you mix that in with this semi-accessible village that you can traverse through and go through different areas and encounter different ghosts and different storylines behind what happened to them. You end up really getting a great world-building approach to the sort of menacing things that are going on inside this village. And to me, that's one of the things that especially made Fatal Frame special, was that through the horror and through the exploration, you really got a good sense of what happened to each and every enemy that you encountered. Not every single one, but you know what I mean. You get a good grasp on what actually happened, and this made the game feel different in a way that not many games accomplish. Most games, you kind of just know this is the enemy, and you might have a bit of a backstory on the enemy or enemies, but you don't really get much more personal touch beyond that. And I think that one of the brilliant things that Fatal Frame 2 did was it added that layer and kind of put that in your face throughout your quest, and it just gave the game a very holistic feel in terms of you feeling very super involved in this world, and that also in a lot of ways made it a lot scarier to me. So this is a game that, unfortunately, it's not ultra accessible. There hasn't really been much in the way of a re-release on modern consoles. It's not really an easy game to find from my own search for it myself, but it is a game that if you do get the chance to play it, especially during the Halloween season, I don't think you can go wrong. I think there's a lot of great things that this game does, and it truly is one of the best examples of a good quality survival horror game.